Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to look at the East African history, and in particular, we're going to look at the topic of slave trade in East Africa. The person presenting you this topic is none other than Mpala Nuruddin, a teacher of history at Navisusa Girls School. So, we're going to look at slave trade in specific, and in particular, we'll be looking at the reasons. First, we're going to look at the reasons as to why slave trade increased in East Africa. And in this instance, when we're looking at that aspect, we'll have to identify some of the key issues, and we'll have what we call the introduction part of it, what is required of us in case we get a question which has a specific category or kind of task which has slave trade in it. In this aspect, they may ask many questions, but to look at the first and the major questions which are normally asked, they may ask and they say, why is there an increase in slave trade in East Africa during the 19th century? This question, the moment you hear or you read the word slave trade, it means that slave trade has been there. So we look at what we call the key word in the question. So what is the key word in the question? The key word in the question is slave trade. So when we find out that this is our key word, it implies that that is the gist of the question. It implies that now the introduction of your answers, you are going to write down before you write the body, it has to be taking or cutting across what we call slave trade. So this now will explain what is slave trade. What do we understand by the term slave trade? What you should not forget that in our history, it is called history because it's all about the past. So I'm looking at it in past tense. Many tend to make a mistake. You come and write your introduction saying slave trade is the buying and selling of human beings. Slave trade is the commercial buying and selling of human beings. It started around 1840, okay, etc. But what we forget that the moment you put this is, you have made your answer present. This implies that the person who is going to mark your answers is going to cross your point or your introduction just because of this tense, okay? So you should put it in mind that every time we're going to answer a history question, we are supposed to answer them in the past. So what comes to our mind? We have to ensure that we have this word, was, okay? Slave trade was the commercial buying and selling of human beings. Why do we call it the commercial buying? Or in some books, you find them referring to it as the commercial transaction of slaves. Reason, it included cash. It included money in it. It included money. So people had to exchange human beings with money. In some other trades, which are not slave trade, we talk about the Indian Ocean trade, it was too much of barter. You give me rice, I give you a portion. You give me a human being, I give you this. But when it comes to slave trade, it was business now. People had grown up now to the business terms in the area. So that exchange, the money format was there. We had the cow shells, which were plenty, and they are moving on. So that's why we call it the commercial transaction. So the wording we are looking at in the introduction, we are looking at the word commercial transaction. This is what we're looking at. The moment this word or these two words are in your paragraph, it implies that you know what you are writing of. So we'll give you a mark because you have said us, you have told us that slave trade was the commercial transaction of slaves or human beings from one area to another, or the buying and selling of human beings from the coastal chiefs, probably to the outside world when they reach the coast of East Africa. So that is what we look at when we come and specify on what to call the introduction of slave trade in East Africa. Okay, so we first look at the introduction part of it, of slave trade. What do we need to write there? Okay, what you should not forget is that slave trade took place or occurred between the mid-19th century up to the end of the 19th century. So we may forget when questions come and you start, I think I've said the mid-19th century, and these ones are saying the 19th century, what should we go with? We should go with all aspects, okay? So as we looked at slave trade, the introduction, we should not forget it. Now we come to the question aspect, okay? The possible questions of part A in slave trade, what should you anticipate? One, why was there an increase in the volume of slave trade in East Africa during the 19th century? We first pose to that question one, okay? If that question comes, what are we going to write in it, okay? One, why was there an increase? Look at this, an increase in the volume, okay? An increase in the volume of slave trade. I've underlined it. An increase in the volume of slave trade in East Africa during the 19th century. This implies that slave trade was there. It was not the first time for slave trade to happen. So slave trade was there. If slave trade was there, it means that there is something which sparked off its volume to increase or to grow rapidly so that everyone or people engage in it and people benefit in it. So that is question one. Question two, why did slave trade expand during the mid-19th century? This implies that slave trade was also there, okay, but it just expanded. Then we can talk of some day-to-day activities, usual ones. For the recent, okay, recent things. In Uganda, we had the parliament, okay, and the parliament, it is shifting from 100 MPs or legislators, 200 to 300. Now we are having 500 plus legislators. This implies they can never fit in the building they had, but it was there. So in case a question comes and they say, why was there an increase in the volume of legislators in Uganda during 2001 or during the year 2005? There are some reasons as to why they expanded their legislature arm, okay, which is the parliament. So when we come to question number 3, it is straight and clear. What factors led to the growth and development of slave trade in East Africa during the 19th century? We're looking at this, to the growth and development, okay? Growth and development. Here, we're looking at trade expand, okay? So these are the 3 key highlights you have looked at, okay? Which implies that we're going to look at the factors as to why slave trade developed, as to why the trade grew, as to why the trade expanded, and as to why there was an increase in the volume of slave trade in East Africa. Not forgetting that this is a question, and if it is part A of the question, we need to write what we call the introduction, which we went through at the beginning of our lesson today. We looked at what an introduction implies and what it needs. So before you come down to the body, to write the factors, to write it and everything, you are supposed to give us an introduction, introduce to us what slave trade implies and what it means. Okay, so after there, you've come down to the body and tell us what the question requires you to write. But all in all, we should not forget the tense when you're writing down our points. So we are going to look at now the points themselves. What do we need? What are we required of to write in case you are going to talk about these questions in details? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at right now. Okay, so in this aspect, we are moving now to the reasons for the increase in slave trade in East Africa by 1850. So when we look at our screens, there is work which is shared there. That work is all about simplifying our study so that each and everything becomes good and becomes too easy for us to understand whatever we are going through. So one, what we should not forget, the first point and the first aspect, we have to look at the abolition of slave trade in West Africa as our first point. And in actual sense, why we look at it as our first point, it's because it started from West Africa, then it came to East Africa. When they abolished it in West Africa, that's when we got it in East Africa. So that's when the Europeans started to come in big numbers. That's when they were diverted, okay? That's when their things were diverted from West Africa and they started to come to East Africa. So that is one of our first point or our first view. So we talk it out, we say it out and write it in, and we say the abolition of slave trade in West Africa in 1840. Also forced the other Europeans who had put all their best in West Africa to shift their guns and their guns back to East Africa, and they get slaves from there. Point number two, we talk about Said's transfer of his capital from Muscat to Zanzibar. When Said transferred his capital from Muscat to Zanzibar, this implies that he shifted from one place to another. And good thing we know about Zanzibar and Said, he introduced clove plantations or clove growing, and on big acres and acres of land, which means him as a person, he couldn't be able to do the needful or to do the work himself. So which implies that these plantations required slaves. They needed slaves. So in this instance, like it or not, slave trade had to move on the way it is. That one, right now, I can give you an example right now of the World Cup which is coming in place. In 2022, there is World Cup in Qatar. Right now, many people are moving from their countries going to Qatar. So when they're going to Qatar, they are going for employment there because stadiums are being built up, roads are being cleared, hotels need managers, hotels need waitresses and waiters, they need chefs, they need security guards, among others. So it is becoming normal for people to do slave trade even after paying, because these companies are taking people outside, you pay some token of appreciation, then they take you. Just that the other time, it used to be force. They come, find you home, grab you, take you the way they want, then they sell you. But nowadays, we go to be slaves willingly. We do whatever we are doing willingly. So slave trade is still there, just that right now it is a bit modernized in that aspect. So we can take it to be that. So that's our point number two. When we come to point number three, we look at what we call the presence of the British troops on the Atlantic Ocean. The presence of the British troops on the Atlantic Ocean. This implies that these people, all these troops were put there to control the enslavement, because people are being got from West Africa to European countries. And you know, by that time, we never had planes, we never had buses. The only means of transportation was the water body. So when the patrols and the troops were put in place to patrol the ocean, so that nothing like enslavement of people is taking place, people to divert their mind and come to East Africa, because in East Africa, everything was moving on the way it was normal. Another issue there, we look at the demand of rain goods, which is okay. People wanted guns, others wanted mirrors, which was cutting across all African chiefs and the interior people, because it was something new. Right now, we have mirrors everywhere, and you feel it is normal for you to go to the mirror in the morning before you go to work or before you go to class to see whether your hair is combed, whether your eyes are fine, whether they don't have anything. By the time it is something new, you look at the mirror, you become happy. You feel like you are in two places. You're in different places at the same time. You're in the mirror, even you are here. Yet it was just all the same. Then we can look at the introduction of guns, which made it easy for societies to raid each other. It was easy for people to raid each other the moment you have a gun. Right now, when you have a gun, everyone will give you respect. By force, you'll not force them to give you respect. They'll start arguing, quarrel, do what and what. You just remove your gun, point it, and tell them, are you saying anything? Because you have the gun, they'll be like, we are sorry, sir. What is it? How can we help you? And that's life, okay? So the fear for the gun is there up to now. So people are still moving with it, and it will be like that. Then have another point of the presence of able organizers. Able organizers. And this was most especially with the interior chiefs. When you come to the Mirambos, the Nyungya Mawes, okay, the Tip, who was a coastal chief, among others. These people are passionate for trade. Reason being, some of them, their land was flat and it couldn't bring back the commodities or the agricultural products. So when they saw slave trade, they were too happy for life, and they decided to move on the way the trade is moving, and everything became fine to the aspect, because the moment you are not having good organizers, it implies that your trade will not boom. It will crash anywhere from a distance, even if you like it or not. Another aspect we look at the presence of Kiswahili as a business language. Okay, some points I'm leaving them out. Reason being, they are easy for us to go through them when we're explaining. So I'm picking out some main and key issues. The presence of Kiswahili as a business language. How is Kiswahili? Well, how was it helpful? Remember, the coastal people, one, they were speaking Swahili. When you come to the interior, the Arabs had already reached the interior of East Africa. They had also spread their language, which is Kiswahili, the mixture of Arabic and the Bantu language. So it was easy for people to transact using the Swahili language. That's why we refer to it as a business language. Reason, you come and talk with someone, you're talking to the coastal people, you're supposed to speak Swahili. When you come to the interior people, you're supposed to speak Swahili. So it was the only language which could come and intermediate between the coastal people and the interior people. So it was the best language to be used in terms of business. That's why we refer to Swahili as a business language. So from there, we move to another aspect. What do we look at now? We look at the intertribal conflicts, the interstate and the intertribal conflicts. How are these conflicts helpful to the people? They are helpful because the moment you fight, there are things we get, or we call them the remains of the war. What remains from the war, that is what we take. So people were captured. The war captives were good. All those people who are war captives who are good, that they were taken in as slaves, because there's no any other issue. People couldn't fight, okay? People couldn't fight because they are taken. They are like, you have conquered us, you have won the war, we are sorry, you have to submit to those ones who have won, and everything moved on the way it was supposed to move. Then we look at the transportation, which made it easy. Remember, before we look at slave trade, there's a topic which was called long distance trade. And the long distance trade, we had the trade routes, okay? What the trade routes, what the northern, what the central and the southern trade route, which means these routes remained in existence, which implies that it became too easy for people carrying out slave trade to ensure that they use the same routes when they are transporting their slaves to the coast. So the existence or the availability of those trade routes made it easy for slave trade to prosper from one area to another. Another issue now we look at the absence of vehicles and the railway lines, okay? There are no vehicles to transport goods which these people are getting. There are no railway lines to transport still those commodities which they want to use at the coast. So the only mean of transport which was around were the slaves. And the slaves are going to transport the things using their head. They're using their heads, that's why I call it the head portage method of transportation, because that was the only way of transporting commodities from here or from the interior to the coast of East Africa. So that's why we had to move, people had to move long distances, carrying items on their heads. Okay, we've ever seen people carrying a basket on their head, they have a baby, even they have jerrycans of water. Maybe the women from the well. So that kind of it's also happened during those times of slave trade. You carry things from the hands, remember their necks are tied one after the other with a chain and their legs so that they do not run away from their masters. So after being chained like that, they still had to be given commodities to carry when they're moving from the interior to the coast of East Africa. So those are some of the few points we could look at and explain in the essence of why there was an increase in slave trade, as to why there was development of slave trade in East Africa, and as to why the trade expanded in the mid-19th century when it comes to East Africa. Okay, so those are the aspects which we are supposed to look at when it comes to that time of slave trade in East Africa.